there's a lot of politics that has to happen between now and 10 years after ratification to close a massive budget gap. And I would want that to be entirely on the spending side, but that's probably not how the politics would play out. It's just going to take a lot of deals and a lot of time for members to sort of rebuild trust in each other and be able to make an agreement on this thing this year and that thing next year and the other thing the year after that. We've gotten into this problem over a long period of time, and it's going to take a little time to get out of it.
Welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on a friend and a guest who knows a lot about fiscal policy, and he has and a lot more actually, but he's got a great book out called Fiscal Democracy in America, How a Balanced Budget Amendment Can Restore Sound Governance. Check that out. It's going in and out because of my background, but you can kind of see it. I'll put in the show notes page as well, so you have all that information. But before we get into all this, Kurt, thank you for being on the show. It's really a pleasure to have you on.
Vance, thanks for having me. I really appreciate your show and you getting the word out to people about all kinds of topics, and I'm just delighted to be back on with you.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, it's been a little while now. You're a return guest too, so I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. It's been a little while. You've done a lot since then, so let me go ahead and give your bio to the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So today's guest is Kurt Couchman, Senior Fellow in Fiscal Policy at Americans for Prosperity, a trusted fiscal ally since our days in Washington when we would talk when I was at the White House and he was doing his own thing. And he was at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget then. Kurt's cutting-edge thinking around balanced budget amendments, statutory fiscal targets, and bipartisan reform has made him a go-to voice in the fight against runaway spending. His new book, as I mentioned, Fiscal Democracy in America, How a Balanced Budget Amendment Can Restore Sound Governance, is out now. You should all go get a copy, and it's essential reading if you care about fiscal sanity, because there's a lot of insanity going on right now, Kurt. So with all that great stuff happening, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
Well, as James Buchanan would say, it's better than farming. No, I just, the opportunity to contribute to, our great country and keeping the American dream alive is an amazing thing. It's really like solving problems, solving complicated puzzles. Because, when you're thinking about, how do you get Congress to work better? There's a lot of things you have to consider. And I was a congressional staffer for 6 years, and I would be frustrated by the way that things didn't work in the way that we were taught in civics growing up. And so I've just been stewing on this question for years, like, why doesn't it work better than it does? And how do we get it to work better? So it's like a really big, complicated puzzle. And I've always been into problem solving and puzzle solving. And so it's just inherently fun. And then, of course, I have kids and I want them to have wonderful lives in America. And I want America to be wonderful. It already is, but it could be wonderfuler. So working on that and trying to keep bad stuff from happening to this amazing place.
Heck yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And how many kids do you have now, Kurt?
I have 3.
Yeah. I thought so, because I have 3 as well. And so that definitely gives you a whole different perspective on the future and where we're at now. And all this debt that we're just putting on them, and they haven't even started working yet. All these things really, and whenever you had your kids, did that help change some of your view on things, or did you always kind of have this view?
It kind of deepened a lot of my commitments, because you kind of understand in a more, I guess, emotional, deeper, visceral way, like why this stuff matters. Before kids, of course, I thought these things were important. I didn't really become a budget guru, or if that's what I am, until after my kids were started to being born. There was a time where I thought I was going to go into health policy, or even before that, energy and environment policy. But here I am, and I guess I'm a budget guy now.
Yeah, man, yeah. And you went to George Mason, right?
Yep.
For your master's in economics, which is awesome.
Right.
I've had several people, as you might guess, on the show from George Mason. I mean, there's so many great people coming out of there. What was your takeaways from George Mason and the economics that you learned there?
Well, first of all, I decided I didn't want to do a PhD because given what I wanted to do, a PhD would have been an overinvestment, especially in the quantitative, the math stuff. And I knew that I wanted to work in public policy. So a master's seemed like the right fit. I had discovered economics in undergrad. I had a terrible economics class in high school. And so I was like, but then I had to take it for something in undergrad, which was at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, the most confusing name in the world.
Yeah.
And I just really discovered that economics kind of systematizes what to me feels like common sense.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do more of that. And George Mason had the program in the DC area that seemed like the best fit for the kinds of policy work that I wanted to do. Philosophically, it's more aligned. And then methodologically, one thing that I really liked about Masonomics is that it gives you a grounding in a lot of different schools of economics. So you do learn neoclassical and Keynesian, neo-Keynesian, but also experimental, institutional. There are other Austrian economics. And so these are monetarism. Like these are all really important parts of the story. And which one is the best mental model for a particular situation just depends on what's happening. And so you need to be conversant in all of them to be a good economist, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, great points there. And I agree. And I wonder, like growing up, you said you like to do puzzles and everything. Were there certain things like growing up that you would do that kind of got you, that you could look back and you say, you know what, this kind of makes the sense of why I'm getting into fiscal policy now? Or I don't know, what was your growing up like, Kurt?
Well, I grew up in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. It's the county with the least people. There's fewer than 5,000 people in the county now.
Wow.
So spent a lot of time building forts with sticks in the woods and that sort of thing with my friends and dams in the creek.
Nice.
But also doing like logic puzzles and Legos and actual puzzles, like 1,000-piece puzzles and that sort of thing. So, I like to figure stuff out, and I do a lot of DIY projects now, less in recent years. It's been busy. But, this is our second fixer-upper house, and there's sort of a joy in figuring out how to fix something. Now, when you're many hours into doing the fix, it gets a little less fun, but, just kind of figuring out the mechanics of how to do it. I just like that. And growing up, I thought I might go into engineering. My dad's a retired metallurgist. And so I was thinking, maybe chemical engineering or mechanical engineering. And I guess what I'm doing now is institutional economics, which is also a kind of engineering. I don't want to call it social engineering, but something in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's true. You were definitely using that side of your brain, right? Putting these pieces together. I love it. And you said you worked in Congress, worked on a Hill for a while, and with Justin Amash and some other great folks that were there. And I wonder, like, you said you were able to learn some of that, that was going on, but what were some of your key insights from working on the Hill? I haven't had that opportunity. I was an intern on the Hill for a little bit, for like a semester when I was in grad school, but I haven't had the chance to work like day to day in one of those positions that on the Hill. What did you take away from that?
One of the biggest things is that you cannot be an expert in everything you're tasked with covering. So when I worked for Justin Amash, I worked for him for 4 years. I covered budget, his budget committee assignment, joint economic committee assignment, tax, healthcare, immigration, judiciary.
Oh my gosh.
Defense, I don't know, a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah.
So you learn quickly that you just can't possibly be an expert in all those things. But what you can learn is where the people that have that expertise are and how to be in touch with them. So it's really about finding the people that share your members' worldview and then reading their stuff. And sometimes you reach out to them and, you work through things directly. So that was a really big one, that you actually develop an expertise in knowing who the trusted people are to get information from. And then also, so one of the things that was fantastic about Justin was that he would explain every single one of his votes on his Facebook page, which meant we had to read and understand everything before he'd take a public position.
Yeah.
Bills, amendments. I mean, before markups, things are flying fast and furious. Like there was this one time, so when Paul Ryan was chairman of the House Budget Committee, this is the first Budget Committee markup. I was a new staffer. I was just drinking from a fire hose. And I went to the staff director, who's a great guy. And I said, hey, Austin, Democrats are offering these amendments. I know you say that members are going to vote against all, or Republicans are going to vote against all of them. But like the way my boss works, he needs to see all of those amendments. And he's like, why? He was like, well, because that's the job. You review things and you make decisions based on what's actually in the text.
Right. But
so
it was
a big part
of
it too.
Yeah.
It just wasn't customary.
No.
And so I learned a ton about statutory analysis. I sometimes joke that working for him was like an apprenticeship in applied statutory law.
Yeah. Wow, man.
And then I worked for Dave Bratt for 2 years. Totally different member, great guy. And I learned a lot working for him as well. Like he talked a lot about the kind of the ethical underpinnings of what we were doing. And for Justin, it was very much like Constitution first, you swear the oath, and then as policy and fiscal responsibility and all that. And Dave had all of that as well, but he also had a layer, and not to say Justin didn't have like an ethical component as well. It's just that Dave was more focused on that. That was a little more central to his way of thinking. Yeah.
And both of them, are huge fiscal hawks. And so you probably got that even grounded more into your head than before.
That's right. It ruined me for other members.
Yeah. Those are great. Those are two great ones for sure, man. I've had Justin Amash on the show not too long ago. We had a great conversation. He's doing a lot of interesting stuff now and everything too. And you also worked with the Center for the Responsible Federal Budget, CRFB. And that's where we met whenever I was at the White House at OMB at the time. And we had some great conversations then. And you were doing some great work there. And what did you take away from that experience? Because, CRFB, they do a lot of great work, and I'm friends with a lot of them. It's not necessarily, I guess it's more center-right, center-left. It's more center. Let's just say center. But was that a challenge for you at all, given you're more fiscal hawkish, or did it help you maybe to see some other things that maybe you had missed before?
Yeah, it's a centrist fiscal watchdog organization. Great people. About half of the folks are on the right, about half are on the left. And then there's a couple of people, including Mark Goldwine and Maya McGinnis, kind of the two of the leaders there, that are true centrists. When Democrats are in power, then people think that CRFB is center-right. When Republicans are in power, they think they're center-left, because they're always sort of critical of what the powers that be are doing because of our broken institutions that encourage irresponsibility. And so I would like to see better institutions, which would be incredibly powerful for groups like CRFB and anybody else who's working in policy that can help broker bipartisan deals to move the country in the right direction. Just have to have the incentives pushing the members in the right direction for that to be possible. It was a great experience. I learned a ton there. I dove a lot deeper into budget process reform. I had done some of that when I was on the Hill, worked on 2 different balanced budget amendments when I was up there. But like lots of different other kinds of nuts and bolts, thinking a lot more about statutory pay as you go. Doing a lot of organizing, because I was actually doing government affairs at CRFB. And so the budget process work was on the side, but it was something that definitely interested me. And then, when the Biden administration took full power, then that was an especially difficult time. And the American Rescue Plan Act, I was one of the ones screaming, this is crazy. And then other people were like, well, there's what do you call it? An output gap. And so this is probably too big. And I'm like, no, this is not. But so it was like a little bit of a philosophical difference over neo-Keynesian, which I'm not, versus more of like a monetarist and neoclassical and Austrian perspective. But good people. And then the opportunity at AFP came along, and I was like, wow, I've loved AFP for so long, and incredible people, and they got excited when I expressed interest. And so 4+ years later, here I am.
Wow. Awesome story, man, in so many ways, and you've been doing a lot of great work. And I want to start digging into this now on the Fiscal Democracy in America, your new book, which is excited for you. Congratulations on that. And
thank you.
Maybe if you could, there's a lot of things to talk about here on this, and I think maybe starting with your institutional economics. I wanted to get into your thinking a little bit more on the institutional economics, maybe is a good framework to then dig in deeper into the book, if you don't mind. How do you like to explain institutional economics? Because I kind of consider myself an institutional economist in many ways too, with Douglas North and some others that are out there. But I wonder how you like to explain it, though, Kurt. What makes you an institutional economist?
Well, it's the rules of the game for policy decision makers. is the way that I think about it. And so there is a version of this that applies to the private sector. When you think about a business climate where, it's fast, easy, cheap to get permits or electricity or that kind of thing, that's more applied to the private sector. And that's part of how we become more prosperous, when you make it easy for people to find new ways of serving each other. When you're talking about public choice married up with institutional economics, then the question is, what are the frameworks that help the decision makers succeed in doing public interest work rather than private interest work? There's always going to be some of that. The question is how you kind of shift the dial or move on the continuum a little bit more from the private interests toward the public interest is the way that I tend to think about it. And so it's about incentives. Economics is all about incentives, but this is just economics as applied to the institutional design, the decision-making framework that especially legislators are applying or working within, because that is how, our government is supposed to work, both at the federal level and in the states. Legislators are supposed to be the ones driving most policy.
Yeah, no, awesome. I when people usually ask me, like, okay, what kind of economist are you, or what school of thought? I usually like to just say free market economist, because I kind of have this institutional economics, public choice economics, Austrian school, and Chicago school kind of all into one. I like all of them. Mm-hmm. Milton Friedman's my favorite economist. Frederick Hayek is up there. Buchanan, of course, North. And so I love the way that you package this, not only in what you just said, but also in the book, because it is about institutions. And as you know, I mean, for the audience though, but like Milton Friedman always says, we want there to be incentives for the wrong people to do the right thing. And all of us in some capacity, Kurt, are wrong people. We're all fallible in some way. We're not perfect or anything. And so incentives matter, as you put it so clearly there. And I wonder, kind of with your background and looking at this, where did you see the incentives weren't applied correctly within the system? And this may take a longer discussion from you. I'll go for it. But like, where did you really start to see the gaps and the holes?
Wow, that is a big question with a really big answer. That'll be my third book where I really get into that. I mean, just to take some of what I talk about a little bit in chapter 11, most of the incentives for members of Congress come down to discipline within their party conference or caucus. Republicans say conference, Democrats say caucus. In Congress, within the states, almost everybody says caucus. But you're accountable to your caucus day in and day out, whether your legislation gets advanced to the floor, whether your amendment gets made in order, whether you're even allowed to go on congressional delegation trips to other countries to learn things, what committee assignments you get, fundraising. These are all things that kind of happen behind closed doors to a large degree, but that is the day-to-day accountability. And so conference and caucus rules matter enormously. And when you've read all of them, the House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans, and I have several times each, many times for the Republicans, then like you see that there are some systematic shifts where the responsibility has gone to the leadership in a way that didn't used to exist. This is something that was kind of moving before the Gingrich Revolution. Gingrich really took it to the nth degree because after being in the wilderness for 50 years, House Republicans were raring to go, big ideas, they wanted to move quickly, and that was more of a command and control structure, but it's kind of gotten worse over the years. Nancy Pelosi is sort of an evil genius at using the levers of power that she had available to drive Democrats in ways that I consider to be unhealthy, and I know some Democrats agree with me as well. And so we've sort of been stuck in this doom loop where we have a bipolar system, and I mean that in several different ways, but like where both parties are sort of pulled to the center of gravity, which is where leadership comes from, and it makes it harder to strike those mini deals across the aisle, and the process has become a lot more locked down because of this as well. So that's one piece of it, but of course, fiscal responsibility is another thing that is just way out the window right now.
Yeah, sure, but I think what I've learned from you and learned from the book and through our conversations too, is that it is more of a structural problem, right? I mean, we could throw out ideas like we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, which I think is true, but there are these things that we often will say and do, but there is more structural problems with the current Congress and the executive branch and the overlap that we see there. I mean, there are a lot of other problems, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard the expression, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
Right? And that's usually said in a different context.
Right.
but in this one, I mean, yeah, like with all different constellations of political power, we've seen, more or less irresponsibility or responsibility as you might see it. But we've kind of continued this slide, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. And it makes you think that maybe the problem, there's some problems with like who's at the table, but obviously there's a systemic problem going on as well. And you can't really get to a better place in a sustainable way unless you fix the system's incentives that are placed on policymakers. And so, I'm a constitutional conservative. Like my view of the federal government is that it should be much, much smaller, doing many, many fewer things.
Yeah.
But we have to fix the system in a way that appeals broadly so that the trade-off conversations can take place. And there will be some things that come out of that I won't like. But I believe and hope that most of the things that would come out of that, I would think would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things thinking through with the institutional economics and just institutional stuff in general is I usually like to think of it as three buckets. I think Peter Bettke taught me about this, but looking at it as three big circles, right, where you have social, political, and economic institutions, and then they overlap in some capacity. If you think about like a Venn diagram here, and that sweet spot is really where we want to be. And in my view, it should be a lot less of the political and a lot more of the social, like the family, the churches, the synagogues, the nonprofits, that part of the economy and society, and versus the economic, which is more the transactions of the private businesses. But you're going to have some roles for government. To your point, like I'm a classical liberal who probably more libertarian than conservative, but I'm classical liberal. And so I want that political one to be as small as possible, that part of the Venn diagram, because I think it crowds out. It gets involved too much in the social and economic institutions, and then that creates a lot of the structural problems we have in our economy, unemployment, and other things that may happen throughout. I wonder though, what do you think about that? Is that kind of how you see things, or maybe a little bit different?
Well, AFP is focused on the key institution of government because we think that could be doing its work a lot better, federal, state, and local. And part of the motivation for that is to break barriers and get the government out of the places where it doesn't belong, where it's actively damaging. And so we want, the social world to thrive, and we want economic growth and prosperity and freedom and choice to be something that uplifts all Americans and lets everybody pursue their version of the American dream. But it's hard to do that, maybe impossible to do that, when Congress is not a functional legislature to the degree that it should be. The founders thought the Congress was going to be the most powerful branch, so they broke it into two houses, and they had different modes of selection, different periods of service for each of them, because they wanted to weaken institutionally the power of Congress so it wouldn't ride roughshod over the courts and the president. And what we've seen now is that it's become a shell of that vision. So I think we can get it back. There's no reason why we can't have a strong Congress, good institutional legislature. And so that's the thing that I've been working on.
Yeah, makes sense. So kind of with that background, I think is good in the book. And, one of the things I want to talk about is the flawed versus principles-based BBAs, balanced budget amendments, and talk a little bit about, what those are and everything. But, your book critiques past attempts at balanced budget amendment as flawed. What makes a principle-based design, something you mentioned a lot here in the book, superior, and why might it resonate more across the political spectrum, maybe allowing for more of those incentives to be in place to help out those institutional flaws?
Well, look at the way the Constitution's currently written.
Yeah.
You have things like Congress shall have power to impose taxes, duties, excise, and imposts. I might have gotten the order wrong. But that's not a whole lot of words for a tax code. And then you look at Title 26 of the Internal Revenue Code, and like, by Lord, there's like a lot of words there. There's a whole lot more than in the Constitution. And so you think a principle is like, okay, Congress is going to have the power to do a thing. And then under the necessary and proper clause, properly understood, then Congress is supposed to flesh out the details of what those principles mean via statute. And so that's kind of the idea with the principles-based BBA. Just keep it simple. Say, the budget or expenditures and revenue shall be balanced, which can happen over more than 1 year. And then there's a couple other things, 2/3 supermajority for emergencies, and then a 10-year transition to get to balance. But I mean, expenditures and revenue shall be equal, which may occur over more than 1 year. What the heck does that mean? You need mechanics, you need definitions, you need all that stuff. But the Constitution's not really the appropriate place to do that, in my view. And so Representative Nathaniel Moran from East Texas is the proponent of this principles-based BBA. It was something that I worked on with Congressman Bratt when he was there. We introduced it in 2015 originally, and then now Governor, then Senator Mike Braun was the Senate proponent of that. And we're looking to see if a senator wants to pick that up this Congress as well, now that Mr. Braun is no longer in Congress.
Retired. You're retired. He's governor now. Right?
I mean, he might consider it a promotion, and in many ways it probably is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. And there's been a lot of efforts for balanced budget amendments. I mean, we've heard this for a long time. There's a number of states that have signed on. I don't remember the exact number now, who have passed some resolution to say they would want to look at this. Do you think that those steps are the right steps to get us to where you want to be, or is there another way or another alternative that you would look at?
Yeah, just to flesh that out a little bit more, there's two ways that constitutional amendments can be proposed. One is by 2/3 of the House and the Senate sending the same text to state legislatures or conventions in the states to be ratified. The other one is that when 2/3 of states apply to Congress for an amendment convention, then Congress must call that convention, and then the states send delegations, and then if a majority of the states, we think, were to agree on an amendment proposal, then that could go out to either the state legislatures or conventions in the states. I think my understanding of Article 5 is that Congress would determine the mode of ratification, no matter how it was proposed, but other people dispute that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's in Article 5 of the Constitution. It's something the founders thought would be an important check on the federal government from the states. We've never done it, since the Constitution's been ratified, but there are people out there trying to make it happen. That said, it is important and has been useful in America's history for the states to push Congress into doing what needs to be done. The direct election of senators, whatever else you want to think about that came in part from a state push for an amendment convention. And I think we're seeing that again with the BBA. There are some other efforts. Indiana Comptroller Elise Nishala is working with a number of different state financial officers to push Congress and the Trump administration to be fiscally responsible, to restrain spending, to get on a path to balance, and to deregulate so that the economy can be free and flourish.
Yeah. Nice. And so there's a path. There are pathways to get there, whether it's Article 5, convention of states, or from Congress doing that as well. And I guess there's always been this, I don't know, part of me, or from what I've heard from others too, is they'll say, well, but if we open it up, we're opening up Pandora's box, and we're going to get some stuff we like a balanced budget amendment. We're going to get some stuff we don't like as well. Are you as concerned about that as some people are, or do you kind of see that that's not as big of a problem?
Yeah, I have some concerns, but there's a couple of things that ameliorate that. One is that it takes 3/4 of state legislatures to ratify a proposed amendment. And so what can actually pass 3/4 of state legislatures? Probably not that much, honestly. But the other thing is that a number of states have passed laws, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not certain whether this is binding or not. Some people think it is, some people don't. But a number of state legislatures have passed state laws saying that their commissioners, which is the people that would go to the convention, would be limited to a certain number of topics. And if not, they could be removed and they could be held criminally and civilly liable. Is that a full fix? I don't know, but it gives me a little bit of reassurance anyway.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. So let's start digging a little bit deeper into the book and your thoughts here. You have a proposed BBA that lets Congress phase out the fiscal gap over 10 years. And I've talked about this before, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and for the audience on why not balance annually or immediately, and how does this model balance flexibility with discipline? What are your thoughts on that?
Annual balance requires limiting your spending every year, or projected spending every year, to the revenue you expect every year. The problem is that revenue is incredibly volatile. It jumps around quite a bit from year to year. And so if you were to do that, then you'd be either doing major policy uncertainty, both on the spending and the revenue side. Policymakers don't want to deal with that. Yeah. And so Congress would pretty shortly get exhausted into doing what a number of states that have supposed annual balance requirements do. They have all these juggling tricks. They'll shift, spending outside of the fiscal window or into it. They'll borrow from pension funds. They will do like surtaxes that are supposed to be temporary but are often not. So it's kind of a mess, and it looks really shady to the public to see all these things that are being done when they're supposed to be balanced in the budget annually. And so you don't have to do that. There's no reason to do that. Switzerland, for example, has the Swiss debt brake, and that is a structural balance rule, or technically a cyclical balance rule, where they kind of marry the trends of spending and revenue together, so that during bad years they can actually run small deficits, and then they make up for them during the good years when they're running surpluses. And that's something that a number of states do as well. So that's what the principles-based BBA would allow. It doesn't require. You could do annual balance under the principles-based BBA. Wouldn't recommend it. Yeah. And there is implementing legislation, or the core of it, that Senator Braun, then Senator Braun, and Representative and House Majority Whip Tom Emmer have proposed. It's called the Responsible Budget Targets Act, and it's really an American version of the statutory side of the Swiss debt brake.
Yeah.
Now, as far as like how long and how much to get to balance, this would allow primary balance or full balance. Primary balance doesn't include interest costs. And, interest is about $1 trillion a year now. Yeah. So primary balance is about half as much deficit reduction as full balance, but it would stabilize the debt burden over the next 10 or 15 years. And then we would probably need to go to primary surpluses in order to really get the debt burden down where we need it to go. And 10 years, there's a lot of politics that has to happen between now and 10 years after ratification to close a massive budget gap. And I would want that to be entirely on the spending side, but that's probably not how the politics would play out. It's just going to take a lot of deals and a lot of time for members to sort of rebuild trust in each other and be able to make an agreement on this thing this year and that thing next year and the other thing the year after that. So it's just we've gotten into this problem over a long period of time, and it's going to take a little time to get out of it. Yeah, no, definitely. And so if we look at a 10-year budget window, and right now it's close to $2 trillion a year, I think on average is what we're expecting to have. $20 trillion more dollars over the course of that time. And that assumes there's different expectations and assumptions that are put in there, of course. But let's just assume that was it. Then over that 10-year period, it would be that, okay, and half of that, to your point, is probably interest, or $1 trillion a year, or whatever it's going to be. Let's say about half. So the primary budget reduction part of it, or the balancing of that over time, the primary budget, could be about $10 trillion. Versus the 20. So CRP just came out, or Committee for Responsible Federal Budget just came out with estimates for that based on their estimates of how the budget baseline has changed as a result of legislation. And they said that primary balance would take about $5.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Okay. And full balance would take about 15.5. So almost 3 times as much over the next 10 years. Wow. So it's a pretty monumental difference, and it's a big lift either way. Yeah. But we have to do something that can be possible, and that at least 2/3 of members of both houses of Congress can imagine being plausible over the next 10 years in order to get a BBA passed, right?
Right. What do you think about some of the pay-go rules and discretionary caps and other things? Can that work alongside this constitutional amendment, or would that even be necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I was working for Amash when the Budget Control Act of 2011 was passed that had the discretionary caps. And my big takeaway from that is that kept everybody's attention focused on appropriations for fiscal responsibility reasons. But appropriations is only about a quarter of federal spending, none of the revenue, none of the tax expenditures. You don't see the new borrowing. You don't see the interest costs. So you're not really looking at a real budget. So my thought is that you actually do want to be looking comprehensively at the budget. And there's a bill for that too. Blake Moore from Utah has that. It's the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act to have Congress do a real budget. That'd be great. And so I think overall caps or primary balance caps like the Emmer Braun bill make a lot of sense. And then in terms of automatic enforcement, we have the sequester mechanism for enforcing discretionary caps. Congress has sort of moved the caps or even waived pay-go in 2013 in order to buy themselves a little bit of room. You have to be sustainable with this stuff. And then there's the Statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act, which I think originated in 1990 in the Budget Enforcement Act and then was re-upped in 2010. Democrats did that when they were in charge. But the design of the enforcement is draconian. It basically wipes out the programs that are covered, because there's a lot of programs that are exempt from the sequester, and those that are left will be totally wiped out by things like the American Rescue Plan Act under statutory pay-go. So we need a new model. I do write about a different model for that in chapter 9 of the book. There's a blog that I've written for AFP that kind of walks through how you would actually go about doing that in a more sustainable way. I call it incremental enforcement because you kind of take parameters that are in law and you basically tell OMB how to tweak them and to what degree, so that you're kind of dividing up the coalition of people that are upset about it in a way that, like, there was this NDD coalition, the non-defense discretionary coalition of all the different groups that were affected by the sequester, and they came and lobbied Congress to loosen it up. So you kind of have to divide and conquer a little bit when you're thinking about your automatic enforcement.
Well, one of the big things, though, and you mentioned it, was this comprehensive budget, which I think is excellent. I think that they should be doing that because it was in 1974 when we had our current budget formation created. Was that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and so we have these 12 bills that has to go through, and I guess if we looked back, Kurt, of like why they did that was they probably felt like, well, there are experts in these different committees who should be working in this area to then put together the budget and then just pass it or not at the end of the day. But it seems like that's created problems to where now they can't get all the 12 budgets done from each one of these appropriations budgets and everything. And it creates this incentive for the quote unquote experts to get in their favorite parts, favorite things. I think there was also this idea that if we had a comprehensive budget, they're going to put in all the pork and everything else in there in this one budget. No one will know it's in there. But now they can almost piece it in there by having all these different appropriations bills going through. So to me, a comprehensive budget would at least let us see what it's all together. And by the way, most states do a comprehensive budget from what I understand as well. So, but make your case. Like, why do you think that's so important?
Well, a budget is inherently one thing that has everything in it. Right? Like, how can you manage a budget well if you're only looking at a little piece of it, unconnected from all the rest of it? It just, when you say it like that, it makes no sense. I actually read a personal finance book specifically to see like what it would say that is applicable to federal budget reform and state budget reform. And I was like, yep, this confirms all this stuff. You should have a comprehensive budget, everything in it, have reasonable goals that are achievable.
Yes.
Like it's like with a diet. Like if you try to drop like 4 pounds a week, then like it's really bad for you and you're not going to be able to stick with it, right? So you need to have reasonable expectations. But yeah, I mean, a comprehensive budget is something that I see as empowering appropriators to do their job, do it well, and get some reinforcements to help move the annual stuff. It's good for leadership because then all the committees kind of get involved in applying their expertise to things, and they're not responsible at the end of the year for deciding what gets stuck into an omnibus and what doesn't. And the members that I worked for would always get really upset with leadership, especially Speaker Boehner, Speaker Ryan, and McCarthy, and all those guys. And it's just not a healthy situation when all of that falls on leadership. Like, give each committee their spending cap and let them manage their programs within it, and they will naturally move resources from where they're providing relatively little value to where they're providing more value. That's the incentives in the system. And then when you see it all together, then you've got people on the Agriculture Committee and the Ways and Means Committee and the Ed Workforce Committee, you could tell I'm a House guy, that have all of their pieces that they care about that are in there, that these deals that they've negotiated and been part of. And now they want this annual budget act to advance. And yes, from their perspective, it has the 12 appropriations bills, subcommittee bills in there. But that's the appropriators thing.
Right.
But I've got my thing in there now. So I want to pass this whole package, and we're all coloring within the lines. So let's do this thing.
Yeah.
Whereas right now, it's the appropriations bills, and it's one committee that has 1 out of 6 House members and not even 1 out of 3 Senate members. And so most members I don't really feel a connection to this. So maybe I'll vote for it, maybe I won't. And the members that I worked for very rarely did vote for appropriations.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, I mean, incentives matter. You got to put in the right incentives, and it just doesn't seem like this way is working right now. Kurt, remind me, when's the last time they've actually passed a budget, like a full budget? Do you remember?
Congress has never passed a budget in the way that we're talking about.
Okay.
They've passed budget resolutions.
Yeah.
They've passed omnibuses and appropriations and minibuses and megabuses and cromnibuses. But they've actually never passed a full budget. There's a guy, Kevin Howick-Horst, who's over at the Foundation for American Innovation, has an incredible knack for digging up historical stuff. And he sent me part of the congressional record where there was a Democrat from Kentucky who was talking about how Congress needed to do a real budget with everything in it. This was like the 1920s or something like that.
Wow.
And it's yes. And, Jefferson talked about how we should be, or maybe it was Madison, talked about how we should be able to lay out the finances of the government so that any person can see what's being done. Yeah. And for whatever reason, Congress hasn't gotten to this point until maybe in the next couple of years, we can advance this comprehensive congressional budget act from Mr. Blake Moore from Utah, and we can actually have better incentives and better results.
Yeah, I hope so. We need it. I mean, on the kind of take another step back from this is we have $37 trillion in national debt. You talked about the $1.1 trillion right around there for net interest payments on the debt. We've got Medicare and Social Security that are driving a lot of these problems, and politically nobody wants to talk about it. Maybe going back to public choice is that it's difficult to win when you're trying to take things away from people. But at the same time, we're taking away things, in my view, from a whole generation. To our point about our kids, we're taking away from them. And you do a great job in the book in the early chapters talking about the huge costs that we're facing. There's a reason why interest rates are higher than they otherwise would be. There's a reason why inflation is higher than it otherwise would be. There are reasons for this that are directly connected to what Congress is doing with this excessive spending problem. And so I think it's very important to have fiscal rules. You and I have kind of differed a little bit on what those rules should look like and everything else. And I like the sustainable budgeting and population inflation, and I like annual balance as well. But at the same time, I think what's more important about all of this is that I think it's important, one, to have competing ideas that are out there, but also to understand that we have a problem. We've got to admit this problem. I guess if you're going to AA or something, the first part of that is to admit you have a problem. And I think that's what you're doing such a great job about and pushing this envelope at AFP and all the other work that you've been doing, Kurt, because I really do think we're making a difference, man. Things are moving in our direction. We had the flat tax revolution, which I think was great. But if we don't get our budgets in order at states and the federal level, I think we need a fiscal rule revolution, whatever you want to call it. But if we don't get that in line, the tax reforms are going to fail. We're going to have problems on the tax side like Kansas ran to in the last decade if we don't get these problems done at the state level. And of course, we're already running into that at the federal level. But I wanted to get you some of your thoughts on this, of how we should proceed with getting these fiscal houses in order and making sure that we have the right incentives in place.
Yeah, I talk about this in the book. When I was a CRFB, Maya McGinnis, the president there, went in to brief the Problem Solvers Caucus, and she gave her whole spiel about fiscal responsibility. And then one of the co-chairs said, "Maya, we know what we need to do. We just don't know how to do it and survive." politically, right? And so that's kind of the game. We have to figure out how it is that members of Congress can strike often bipartisan deals to do things more efficiently and more effectively so that, the country can prosper for the long run and we get this debt under control. And at the same time, they can be reasonably certain that it won't make much of a difference with respect to their political prospects. And indeed, by being able to say, hey, we did this and that, they might actually be able to benefit from some of these deals because, you look at Social Security, there's all kinds of outdated stuff in that program. It was built 90 years ago and it hasn't changed too much. And so the society has changed and the program should change with it. But yeah, there's so much work to be done. There's so much pent up energy. And I think what it comes down to is finding, helping members understand why it's in their interests, and then finding the opportunities or building the opportunities to drive that forward. This fall, we have a number of funding packages that Congress will pass. That's probably not the right fit for a comprehensive Congressional Budget Act. There's more to be built there, but things like the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act or some other things like that, maybe a fiscal commission, maybe some other things, those should ride along.
Yeah.
And then keep building the case for going bigger. If you look at the history of the 1974 Budget Act, a lot of that came because Congress felt like the Nixon administration was doing all kinds of stuff that it didn't agree with. The Nixon administration tried to cancel and not spend about 1/3 of non-defense discretionary spending in 1973. And so the Impoundment Control Act was a separate bill, and then it got packaged with the Congressional Budget Act that really did move us forward. It created the Congressional Budget Office, which isn't perfect, but it's a lot better than what came before. And it created the House and Senate budget committees, the modern budget process. So, we can build on that success and keep working forward, but we just have to help members understand why it's good for them to do these things, and it's not politically toxic if we do it the right way.
Yeah, no, great points there. And again, the book is Fiscal Democracy in America, How a Balanced Budget Amendment Can Restore Sound Government. And there it is. And I'll make sure to put this all in the show notes page as well. And so as we're wrapping up now, Kurt, we're recording this on September 3rd. It's actually going to go live September 11th. And it's kind of interesting. We both have American flags up today. We didn't plan that or anything if you're watching this. But, it also is a good reminder of lessons learned and things that we need to make sure that we hold dear, like our family and everything else, but also our country is something that is important. And I hope that we see more flourishing and prosperity. And I think it's right along with the lines that you're already working on. So thank you for all you're doing, Kurt. And I want to leave you with any last words you'd like to say about the book, anything else, and maybe best places to find you for the audience.
Sure. Well, the book has been a labor of love. I started working on these ideas back in 2010, started writing the book in 2019. Pretty excited that it's finally out in the world now. We're working on advancing these proposals into law, into the Constitution with respect to the BBA. So this is a live exercise. It's a real joy to work on this and to work with partners like you, Vance, in helping people understand how much brighter the future can be if we're just able to work for it and move the ball forward. I do want to say at the bottom of my flag there, I don't know if you can see, we've got Ben Franklin having a watchful eye.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I see it. Yep.
Being from Pennsylvania, and Ben Franklin had a lot to say about fiscal responsibility and living the good life, and there's some of these lessons that human nature, it's basically the same over the centuries, over the millennia. Yeah. But one thing that has lifted us up is better and better institutions. The discovery of free markets has lifted billions of people out of poverty, and we've built institutions throughout our country's history. The founding generation did. Every generation has done some. And the way to keep doing better is to keep having better institutions and then use them to make better decisions.
Yeah. Well put, as usual, Kurt. It's really a pleasure to have you on the Let People Prosper show. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I hope you have much success with your book and getting this out there and changing things and making things better. And God bless you and your family.
Thanks. Same to you as well. It's been great with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. Well, for the audience, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed a discussion about fiscal democracy in America and learned something along the way. Please share this with your friends and family. They too need to learn about the path forward to get our fiscal house in order and therefore our economic house in order as well. So go and share this with all your friends and family. You can check out more information about my work and the podcast at vanceginn.com or go to my newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com. So until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.